Do you think that adding lots of salt causes high blood pressure?
I add salt to my coffee. I add salt to lots of things. My blood pressure is in the normal range. Do an experiment. Add salt for 2 days. Watch what your blood pressure does.
Dr. Annette Bosworth is a world-renowned expert in fixing the world's most chronic diseases.
She will help you fix your blood pressure and your heart and get off medications for good.
The reason people care about this high blood pressure thing is it links to cardiovascular disease, to heart disease, early dementia, brain fog. By about 5 years of high blood pressure, there's this switch that happens inside a human body that you can't reverse. The numbers say 125 over 85 would be too high. You're like, what? I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, the one who has kind of normal blood pressure, but that extra 20 pounds, that extra 15 pounds that you just can't seem to get off. It matters. When I'm approaching a patient who says, tell me the truth, doc, can I add salt to my low salt diet after taking 4 blood pressure medicines for the better part of 10 years? And the answer is yes, but not till next week. Don't focus on the salt. Focus on the insulin. When I have a patient who's arguing with me about that, like, how can you tell patients to eat Spam and you're trying to control their blood pressure? And I'm like, well, the big picture is we're lowering the insulin. I've stopped as many as 5 blood pressures in one patient over a 48-hour period. I tell patients, you don't die of high blood pressure when it's there for a day. You die of high blood pressure when it's there for 6 months. Welcome to the 21st century, folks. Check your own blood pressure.
This episode features Dr. Annette Bosworth, and we're talking about the correct way to fix your blood pressure without taking medications. Now, by the end of the episode, if you still need help or you have a question, you can meet Dr. Boz live on our Go Carnivore community. You can ask her any of your questions as well as our other carnivore doctors. Just head to gocarnivore.com. Now, if you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please hit the subscribe button because we know that food is medicine. And by the simple act of subscribing, you can help share the message to millions more people that need to hear the truth. And now for the episode with Dr. Annette Bosworth. Dr. Boz, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on again. I can't tell you how much praise my fans and then also your audience had after we did our last talk. So it's great to be back.
Well, it's great to have you back. Now, one of the biggest things that causes early death in most people is heart disease. And one of the biggest things that causes heart disease is high blood pressure. And in fact, 1.3 billion people across the world have high blood pressure and they don't even know it. And the number that your doctor gives you for what is safe for blood pressure is actually not safe. It's not okay. And it's too high. So today, Dr. Boz is going to share her decades of clinical experience. We're going to talk about the actual safe blood pressure range. It's probably lower than you think. We're also going to talk about the correct way to fix your blood pressure and why you need to add salt. So Dr. Boz, my first question. I want to talk about this connection between salt and high blood pressure. Do you think that adding lots of salt causes high blood pressure?
Well, there's a 2-part answer. Yes, it does cause higher blood pressure for a time when that introduction of salt is new to your body. So if you've had a season where you say, oh, I heard this doctor on a podcast say that salt was okay. My blood pressure is something my doctor's been talking to me about. And they start doing things like what I do. I add salt to my coffee. I add salt to lots of things. And I have really good evidence that my blood pressure is in the normal range. So they hear on a podcast, they do this thing, they add that salt, and then they check their blood pressure. And indeed, it was higher. So the short answer is yes, salt has rules of physics that it will attract water. And when we look at our blood pressure, it is a circulation of a pump and a hose. And what we call it a closed system, meaning you're pumping that fluid around a body. The length of that hose is not going to change over the next 24 hours. And the amount of volume inside that blood that's circulating doesn't usually change that much unless you do some things that shift metabolism rather quickly. And in people who are metabolically unhealthy. And unfortunately, this word means something very clear in my mind after 25 years of internal medicine and watching people, trying to die and me trying to not help them die. Don't do that. It's going to increase your risk of death. when I watch what happens to a metabolically healthy person who adds salt, a minimal difference in my blood pressure happens. It's actually a good thing for me to be adding salt. But in somebody who is not metabolically healthy and they hear the one fact that says, add salt, your blood pressure will be better, they're missing about 10 steps ahead of time. So when I'm approaching a patient who says, tell me the truth, doc, can I add salt to my low salt diet after taking 4 blood pressure medicines for the better part of 10 years? And the answer is yes, but not till next week. So when I have a patient, let's just take this unhealthy patient who, let's say, is on 4 blood pressure medicines. And when they come and we first got them on a blood pressure medicine, we said, here's a few things you could do that would lower your blood pressure. We know that this is one of the biggest predictors for lifespan. Like blood pressure, it actually doesn't win as of July of 2024, but it is number 2. It is a huge predictor for how well you'll live, is what is that blood pressure. Many times they haven't been checking it. It's a silent symptom that it's crept up out of what we now know is a very healthy range in the 1-teens. So 115, 118, good number on the top number. And that lower number, we like to see it in the 70s. But if it creeps up into the 120s or even in the 130s, most people do not have a symptom. And over time, if they show up at their yearly doctor's appointment and I see, oh, wow, your blood pressure's in the 140s, it's easy to say, I'm sure it's because you're here to see me. But the truth is, it's way too high for you to have the kind of longevity you want. So we will start by saying, I have one of these little things called a prescription, and we can lower it. I'll manipulate how your hoses in your body work, or I'll manipulate your pump, the heart, the 2 things that I can control with those prescriptions. And you might want to lower the salt in the next couple of days if we're trying to get it down for a short term. But that salt manipulation, well, it's a dirty trick. In fact, the first place a doctor gets trained on how to manage blood pressure is when you are a practicing physician in residency and all of your patients are laying there in a bed in the hospital. Your job is to get them out of the hospital. And part of that job is the quicker you get them out, the better, like a lot of things go. The better your workload, the better for the patient, the lower the cost, more time spent in the hospital actually has a mortality rate. So get them out the door. And a really good trick is to tell the nurses and to tell the dietitian, cut out all the salt. And by golly, within a couple of days, I can lower your blood pressure really quick. You will hate the taste of your food. Your brain will not work very well, but I will win and you'll get off of my responsibility and I'll move on to the next 30 patients I take care of. So this little hack is built into the training of how to survive as a physician. And then it has been studied in is it evidence-based that lowering the salt improves that? Well, it did lower blood pressure, but it did not improve their lifespan. It did not decrease that mortality rate that we should all have been concerned with, saying the reason I'm so focused on your blood pressure is it links to an early death, and not just a death that's, maybe the kind people would pray for, saying I lived a healthy life, I hopped in the grave the next day, and my quality of life was really wonderful. We're looking at your lifespan gets really rotten the last 15 to 20 to 30 years if you've been having this blood pressure sneak up in your body. So when I look at why I can say with confidence that if you have blood pressure and you have no metabolic problems, your kidneys do what they're supposed to do, and they will handle that salt without any problems. They will be graceful and your blood pressure will stay where it's supposed to, just like mine does. But if you're like many of my patients who for years and years have had a few too many of those processed carbs, you've put on a few too many inches around your middle, or maybe your cholesterol's a little higher and you don't know that your blood pressure's higher, but you're not in a healthy state, and you add that salt, your kidneys will say, hey, I am keeping up with everything you're throwing at me. I do not have the reserve to process this much salt in short term. And you will see that blood pressure rise and can stay there until your kidneys get used to it. Just like when I did the trick to get you out of my bed in the hospital and I took away your salt. I lowered your blood pressure by taking away your salt, but it only really lasted for 4 to 5 days. Many times people just sneak salt into things or they don't know that it's there. But even if you kept that salt low, the impact on your blood pressure is that your body adjusted. It started to process those electrolytes in a different way, and the kidney, didn't have to do quite as much work, but the blood pressure went back to what it was when you were in the hospital. When I do the opposite, when I add salt to somebody's system, you will see that blood pressure rise, and then your kidneys will get used to processing that amount of salt. Do you add salt to your?
Of course, I'm a carnivore. I add salt all the time, every single meal. I don't add salt to my coffee because that's a bit salty, but I used to add butter to my coffee. But, I just wanted to clarify that. So the salt, it's basically a little trick. So that's going to elevate your blood pressure because in a metabolically unhealthy person, for example, somebody eating ultra-processed foods, because their body can't handle that extra salt, the salt attaches more water and more water retention fluid happening in the body. But the thing is, it doesn't mean that people should not add salt. They've got to fix something else.
Yes. Well, so I was going to use this as a teaching point. So you're carnivore. Have you ever had like a piece of really nicely done meat, but you got maybe the outside with the excess salt, and maybe even you put a little too much salt on it, and the next day you had a little swelling?
Yes, and my weight increases.
Yeah, right. Okay. So that's the acute phase. So you can measure it. Any human's going to see this, and you will see, oh my gosh, I did that. And if you have a little exercise, that circulation in your body will get rid of that extra excess fluid. But if you're my patient, if you're somebody who's been you're saying, doc, I've heard that this carnivore or keto thing is healthy, and I'm going to try to do it, and they start with salt before they get rid of carbs. What they're really fighting against is you have controlled insulin. Me, I've got pretty well controlled insulin. I've had a season that's not been, and if I do a few things wrong too many times in a row, it sneaks right back into my life. And I can always tell by looking at how long does that swelling last when it hits me. When you take a healthy person, they add salt, they might get that little increase in weight, but a little bit of exercise or a couple of days without adding that, and your kidney will handle it just fine. What is missing in you that happens in the pathology of patients is insulin, is the excess amount of insulin. And you don't get this in one day. When you ate that carnivore and you had extra salt on it more than you were expecting, and you saw that increase your fluid, the insulin that's in your body is normal. You ate meat and maybe produced a little insulin, but nothing excessive. Your body had this tidal wave of increased salt, the fluid followed, and then you dealt with it. When you look at insulin resistant patients, they put that excess salt in, and the reason it gets trapped in their legs, in their body, in their ring fingers is the insulin didn't go away. You added that, you stimulated even more insulin than you did the day before, and that insulin plus salt now turns into a chronic destructive process. And I'm saying, don't focus on the salt, focus on the insulin. You heard me say earlier that blood pressure used to be the biggest predictor of, if you're looking for longevity, if you're looking for heart health, blood pressure matters most. And it does. But it just got out-trumped by something that I think speaks to this exact problem. It's a measuring unit called LPIR. It is a calculated metric that's found in a nuclear magnetic, a fancy blood cholesterol test that shows healthcare providers how much insulin was that cholesterol around. So it's a mathematical calculation that looks at how big was your cholesterol particles, how long did they hang around, how many of them did they have, how quickly did you get rid of them. And that is what insulin was doing. We can measure how much insulin resistance do you have according to your cholesterol. Again, the reason people care about this high blood pressure thing is it links to cardiovascular disease, to heart disease, to the brain not doing well, whether you call that early dementia, brain fog, can't keep all 5 balls in the air anymore. You can find lots of terms for why aren't you functioning as well as you are. But when it comes to the unifying thing that I see in chronic diseases throughout the country, and especially as they get over the age of 40, insulin wins. Insulin wins. And you can play the trick of salt, but I I would strongly encourage, don't waste your time. Focus on the insulin. Get that down, and now we can, yeah. And we can measure it now. I mean, the blood pressure is notably much easier to measure. Well, looking at people's blood pressure, watching to see that they are educated, keep an eye. How well are your kidneys keeping up? And a healthy set does have that blood pressure in the 1 teens, not the 120s like we used to say, and not the 130s like they said when I first started medicine, but truly getting them in the 1 teens. And then the bottom number we want in that 70s. Again, not in the 80s, not in the even, if it hits, it used to be something when I first got into medicine, you get taught by the guidelines, but guidelines are taught to you by humans. And you watch how humans respond when, we got that top number down where we needed it to. If that bottom number isn't quite right, it's okay. They're already on 3 prescription medications to get them there. I mean, and still gaining massive amounts of weight, still having the health problems. About 10 years go by and they change the guidelines and we say, okay, now we need to have that number in the 120s, and we definitely need to get that number in the low 80s. And we want it less than 80 if you can. And now we are strictly in the 1 teens, in the 70s. If you get it there, we can say important things like the chances that you're going to suffer from these cardiovascular issues are much less. But it isn't, I would also say it doesn't matter what it is in my office. It matters what my blood pressure is in my office, but it matters what it is in your world. And, getting people to take ownership of it, and then, do an experiment, add salt for 2 days, watch what your blood pressure does. Then take it away for 2 days, watch what your blood pressure does. And you will see that this oscillation is an easy experiment that you can follow. Unfortunately, you will acclimate. Your kidneys are going to do what they're supposed to do. They're going to adjust to what you've put in your body.
I think it's important to understand that it's not the salt that's causing the high blood pressure. It's that your body is just adjusting to the added stress if you're metabolically damaged. I want to talk about the connection between insulin resistance and high blood pressure and the fix and the solution a little bit later. But I want to ask about you and your patients, because you see a lot of patients, and I'm curious, how many patients, because you mentioned the blood pressure number should be in the teens. So we're going to talk more about that, because I'm sure many doctors say to their patients, 120/80, 130/90 is fine. It's okay. How many of your patients have elevated blood pressure, and do they know?
Well, it is, it's probably a skewed population. I am an internist, so the more times you go around the sun, the more likely it is you're going to meet one of me. So as patients age, they graduate from other practices like OB-GYN or obviously pediatrics. They'll send their diabetics to me. And I tend to, the message of an internal medicine is we manage chronic disease. So I think out of 30 charts, the last 30 charts, there's probably only 6 that don't have high blood pressure. It's just such a common problem. And part of it, Rihanna, isn't just that the blood pressure got elevated in one practice and we do our best to say, hey, lose some weight, the mass is really an important part of this equation. It's a pump and hose system, and the mileage is important. For every pound you put on of human tissue, it's like another 3 miles your heart had to pump through. So then you get up to 10 pounds. That's, the mileage matters. How hard does your heart have to pump to move the fluid along? And, unfortunately, when blood pressure lingers and it doesn't get, corrected, it doesn't get down into that healthy range. And I even see this when I'm doing all the work. When you come to me and let's say you're in your 40s and we first see a little bit of blood pressure and we say, yeah, you should have that blood pressure be less. And maybe I give you a couple of visits to try and get it down. But then I say the words, you can do this or I can do this. But the fact that we haven't moved the needle in a year, your kidneys don't care. Your kidneys are still taking the brunt of what that pressure does every beat. And I want your kidneys to be in a reversible state when we finally get this weight off. So let's get the blood pressure down. It does matter. Area under the curve matters. The number of years we went without treating you before we knew was one thing. But now we know, we've given you, 3 visits to try and reverse that. And I need to help you say the kidneys don't care. They take the trauma. And we use kidneys because they're very easy to measure the damage. So I can look at your urine and say, the urine isn't supposed to have these things in it. And your year of high blood pressure has now started allowing this little molecule into your urine. I can also do the same thing. Your blood is supposed to be cleaned by the kidneys. It shouldn't allow this little molecule to keep circulating at such high levels. So I can look on either side of that, basement membrane essentially, and I can see, did the trash get too high in the urine, or did the trash that's supposed to be in the urine not get as much of it and stay in the circulation? And we can look at both sides of that. We don't want to see some of the things slipping into the urine ever. And so when I can measure microscopic amounts of it, I know your kidney has seen the damage. And unfortunately, what that also means is your heart has seen the damage, and so has your brain. So these end organs are very, very calculated for that kidney function. And when we look at by about 5 years of high blood pressure, there's this switch that happens inside a human body that you can't reverse. And now you've got a problem that you're going to have to see me until we die. You're going to need a prescription until we die. Once blood pressure has been at this elevated level, and 5 years is what I see clinically. There's a few studies that say it's closer to 10 years. Maybe it's because they don't see me until, but we've been at it 5 years. And now, even though they get the weight off, even though they run and have a physically active body, the blood pressure never went back to normal. And that's what I'm trying to prevent. Like, if I put this medication on board, even though your life's not perfect, I can't snap you and get this insulin resistance gone. I'm trying to preserve that you don't switch and flip that lever that can't seem to be undone. We don't have a way to undo that.
So how high is too high that you can never go back to have normal blood pressure?
Well, that's just it. The numbers say, 125 over 85 would be too high. You're like, what? Yeah. So, that's the study that came out where it said, yep, we are now where they stopped the study early because the patients who were having the blood pressure in the 120s over 80s were compared to what they called the ultra controlled blood pressure, which was in the 110s. Like, that's aggressive. Like, gosh, I'm going to give them that much medication. Are they going to get lightheaded? That's really intense. But the people in the 120s over 80s died quicker, had more heart attacks. They stopped the study early to say, hey, everybody pay attention. This blood pressure thing is a way bigger deal than you think it is. And what I contend is control it, because there are some sneaky things that are happening at a subcellular, at a systematic level that I wish I could push the undo button, but it went on for too long. And now I can't keep your blood pressure in the 110s over 70s. The switch is turned on. You're going to need this prescription until you die now. And to me, that's where people should be saying, okay, I've robbed Peter to pay Paul too long. There's something in my health I need to take control over. And if blood pressure is the place that you finally can hear, no, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, the one who has kind of normal blood pressure, but that extra 20 pounds, that extra 15 pounds that you just can't seem to get off, it matters.
As Dr. Boz mentions, blood pressure matters, and anything over 120 over 80 is too high. And later in the episode, Dr. Boz will talk about the correct way to fix your blood pressure, and that involves a ketogenic diet or even a carnivore diet. Now, as you do this, you might experience some side effects like headache, nausea, and fatigue. That is very normal, especially at the beginning. So what you can do is add in some high quality electrolytes that has sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And that is going to help for proper body function and brain function. And that's why I have Element as a sponsor of today's video. I personally like to use a high quality supplement like Element because it has a science-backed mix of sodium, potassium, and magnesium without anything artificial and no preservatives. Now, Element has a wide variety of flavors to use, but I like to use the raw unflavored option in my morning coffee. And I have some exciting news. The Element Chocolate Medley range is back for a limited time from October 22nd. Each box contains 10 chocolate raspberry, 10 chocolate mint, and 10 chocolate chai. It is designed to be enjoyed hot or swirled into your favorite recipes. It is a great and healthy way to warm up your winter. And right now, Element is offering this free sample pack on every order. So you're going to get 8 single servings of Element to try for free. So if you want this, just head to drinkelement.com/the Primal Podcast. So can we talk about how it matters? I want to also get to those numbers because people are probably thinking, holy moly, I was going to say like something else, but that is sounds like a very conservative number. 120/80 is what we've been told forever as being normal blood pressure, but it's not. So we're going to talk about a bit later, men and women, what their numbers should be. But I want to ask you, so what is the consequence of having this even 120/80? What's happening in the arteries of people physically? What's happening and how does that cause damage to the heart and the brain?
Yeah, well, it does make you. Did you ever watch the cartoon when you were a kid, The Magic School Bus? And there was Mrs. Frizzle. That's a cartoon character who would teach about science and the world of, looking at fifth graders, I think was her class size. But she would help you imagine what it would look like in parts of the body or science to explain it. And I think we need to hop on a magic school bus and go to your kidney. When arteries are being damaged, there's a mystery to this, right? Like I can put something in your body and measure your blood pressure. I can even put little cameras in and snake them up into the arteries of your heart, look around to see, is there anything clogged? But the real microscopic processes that are happening during blood pressure, well, they're difficult to study when I start to intervene. Now you're under pressure, you're under anesthesia, there's all kinds of things that change. And it's really this chronic story that we know is happening inside the bodies that we're adding up to a score that says, this is a really important metric. Blood pressure should be controlled. So the kidney turns out to be the easiest place to study it. That artery that's in the kidney is unique to the body, and it gets down to this place where the kidney does a very fun science experiment and dumps all of those particulates into this pool of your body and waste, and then it starts to throw the good things back into the body that it needs. And when everything goes correctly, the healthy stuff ended up back in your circulation and the waste stayed in your urine. And it's this really powerful place that as long as you don't put it under high pressure, it works well. The other thing about the kidney is it doesn't complain. Even when you're dying of kidney failure, your kidneys don't talk much. They don't have a lot of symptoms. And so the pressure inside a kidney, not only is it silent, it's you must be studying the microscopic things in order to see the damage. And when that pressure gets to be above 120, it starts to tear this filter that shouldn't have a tear in it. And one little tear, no problem, your body will zip it up. But now you've got a chronic problem. It's in the 120s for a while. And we just see that there are a few proteins, a few particles that are ending up in the urine that should not end up in there. And that is because the pressure destroyed this microscopic connection between the cells. And that place of the kidney it's like the canary in the cave. It will whisper to your doctors through laboratory data, finding the trash too high in your circulation and the good stuff that you're not supposed to let into your urine starts to sneak into your urine. And that is the warning that says, the metabolic health is changing, and the reversal of that metabolic health is very difficult once we get to a tipping point. I think that would probably be one of the hardest realizations that, as a young physician, you would, you look at guidelines, you try to reach the guidelines for your patients. And when they don't quite reach it, you're a human taking care of another human, and you're like, that one's good enough. That LDL cholesterol is close enough. We've changed those guidelines. Don't worry, that's good enough. But if there's one place that the studies continue to validate that we should have even been more strict, and it's not like we're measuring, how many more. So like sometimes when I look at the measurements of guessing, did this metric really change the life of a patient? Blood pressure's got great measurements. They died fast. They had more heart attacks, more vascular events, period, when that blood pressure was in the 120s and when it was in the 80s, pushing it down to the 1 teens, and the 70s means The patients did not die faster. I mean, I hate to repeat that the third time. It was that shocking to me. Like, you want me to do what? I mean, again, it's the third time I've had to kind of ratchet up the guidelines for patients. And, in other areas of medicine, I've said, I don't believe it as much, but blood pressure left me no doubt.
The information that you're talking about is from the SPRINT trial. So that was the trial that was stopped early, and that goes to show how scary it is to have elevated blood pressure. And it's not even as elevated as people say. As doctors say, they think that the 140 over 90 is elevated, or 180 over whatever is a crisis. But you're saying even 120 over 80 is too high. Let's talk about numbers that people can think, okay, for women and men, what they should get to. But I always say but, because I have to ask this before asking this question. Is it genetic by any means if somebody has high blood pressure and they think, oh my God, there's no way that I can fix it because my mom or my dad gave it to me?
You know what? I don't let my patients get away with that. I mean, meaning there are a lot of things that genetics have taught us. I mean, I'm in the era of physicians where we mapped out the genetic code, and what we learned from all that was, okay, we can map it out, but there's really a much more important part of that genetic code that really came to our awareness over the 10 years after we mapped it, and that was, well, what part of the genetic code are you expressing? What is that epigenetic that's in your body? And you really control that. I mean, we know that there are parts of that epigenetic code that carry on for generations. So it's not that you can't give some of the blame to your ancestors, but it's also a very powerful ownership that I don't want patients to deny. I want them seeing, no, I will tell you, as as the privilege of watching patients age and seeing some of them do it so gracefully, and then some of them saying it's a lost cause. The only thing I've got is you, doc, adding these prescription medications, and thank God for them. They have kept patients alive and really improved the quality of life. But it's not the answer that you should be relying on. The lever that's much better to pull is, yeah, you may have the genetics from your parents. You may even have epigenetics from the last 3 or 4 generations of ancestors. But how you impact that is a host of controllable factors that really do matter. And they make a big difference. Like, if you say, when you tell a patient, don't worry, this is genetic, there's nothing you can do about it. The helplessness is, well, it's not a good life. I mean, they start to say, poor me, pity me, there's nothing I can do. And there's plenty of things in medicine that is the case. Like, you've got ALS, you've got, multiple sclerosis. And although I would still contend there's things you can do about that, blood pressure, you do not get that morning. Yes, there's a genetic component, but there is absolutely your ability to say, get the insulin down. It's what's causing this to be the pathology that's going to affect the quality of your life as we're having it.
When people see those two numbers, there's one on top, one at the bottom. Let's explain what the number means, and then what are those numbers for men and for women that they need to attain.
Right. So let's talk about this. So I don't lose my audience. We're going to call this lub, dub. So as your heart goes, lub is when the heart squeezes and pushes blood forward, and dub is when the heart relaxes and the next volume of fluid fills the chambers of the heart. Now, specifically, let's just imagine that left side of the heart, which is the biggest side of that pump. And when we squeeze that big ventricle and push the blood forward, when we hear the lub, that is the pressure it takes for the miles and miles and miles of blood to move forward about an inch, inch and a half. And so as you squeeze that forward, the fluid penetrates the body, and now there's a split second that it will fill. The pressure it takes to move the blood forward is what we call the systolic blood pressure. And that's your top number. That's the one that we've said should be in the 120s for all those years. The bottom number should be, the bottom number is when that heart relaxes and the blood fills, some of it backfills if you've got a broken valve, but most of that filling is coming from the next section of the blood supply. Your lub dub are the top number, lower number. And I think when you listen to your own heart, even if you can feel the pulse, when you feel that thump under your fingers, that's your lub. Should be 120. You should have 120 millimeters of mercury of pressure to move that blood pressure forward. And we want that under that 120 for the best longevity.
Is that for men and for women? So under 120. So if it's 115, 117, over what, like 80 or 70?
Right. Well, so when's the last time you took your blood pressure?
Oh, my father-in-law has high blood pressure. He adds the salt and his blood pressure increases. So then I measured my blood pressure. It was 116 over 70.
Right. So perfect. That's a great answer. When you look at that blood pressure for women, we definitely, in the trial, that approach to when you back away from the guidelines, separating that into men and women is something that the nuances of the scientific world has parsed apart. But I don't find it helpful when I look at what's the difference between men and women. The kidney function is what is destroyed when those numbers constantly were above 120 and constantly above 80. So we've had, you have guidelines out there saying for men, we can allow this, for women, we can allow that. But when you get down to whose kidney function did not get affected, we want both of them to stay less than 120 and less than 80. And I know it sounds profound. It's still shocking to me to do this because I spent 20 years saying, even when the sprint trial came out, I thought, I'm going to have to go read this for myself. There's got to be a mistake. and truly that difference was, it took me a good 6 months to get the language to come out of my mouth because I'm like, wow, I have been telling patients this for so long to shift that. And no, really, if we're controlling blood pressure, that's what we want it to be. So, the question that I think what patients struggle with is, so you checked it a couple of times and it's 122 over, fine, 82. So it's just on the edge of that. Is that enough to start medication? Have you? Yeah, I wouldn't. Again, I don't want to remove that the lever of saying take control of this. If I look at patients who are starting to see a blood pressure rise, so you've got a great baseline. You've got your father-in-law who's helping you check your blood pressure, and at least you can write in the book somewhere that my blood pressure was in the 110s over 70s. You were fine. And then a few years go by. And it's just like insulin resistance to not tell you that it's taking more, you're producing more insulin than you needed to, God gives you a blessing of getting pregnant. You have a insulin resistance setting that automatically accompanies gestating a child. That equation will affect your blood pressure. And now the baby's born. And afterwards, it's not quite as low as it used to be. And you say, okay, should I start medications? The first thing I'm thinking of is reverse that insulin resistance. Yes, you needed it to keep that baby there. Yes, you needed it even when you were nursing the baby. But you now have a long life ahead of you that you do not want that turned on. From everything from your hormones to your vitamin D, to your brain function, to your depth of sleep, that insulin is going to be altering the outcome, the aging rate of your body. So to me, when I start to see those blood pressures in those previously normal, but now abnormal levels, it opens up this chapter to say the insulin's high. And, then we get into saying, well, I measured my insulin. It wasn't that bad. I'm like, no. The effect of what insulin is doing to your body is easy for me to measure when you start to see the sneak of that blood pressure rise. Instead of reaching for the prescriptions that I only get 5 years to use before this switch, 10 years according to the research, but to me, it seems to be about 5 in my practice, where we've got that switch that's turned on. And now everything from uric acid to elevated homocysteine levels to increased C-reactive protein, all of those are telling me the insulin resistance has a foothold in their metabolism, and getting it to go away, it's a full-time effort. It is all hands on deck to try and undo that. To me, that's a better journey than the prescription medication when those numbers are that low.
Okay, let's talk about the cause of high blood pressure. And to do that, I have a game to play. It's fun. Okay, so we're going to play a game, which is this food going to increase my blood pressure or decrease my blood pressure? And this is based on the YouTube comments that I get, because if we talk about some ketogenic foods or some carnivore foods, they say that's going to skyrocket my blood pressure and that's really bad for your heart. So let's start with the first one. So the first one is fried bacon. For me, no, that's not going to increase my blood pressure.
No, not going to increase mine either.
So is it good to eat?
Yeah. So in that process, both of us are living in a low carbohydrate approach to our health, and it's not the first day we've done it. Meaning our kidneys are used to handling that amount of salt. Our bodies are in a ketogenic state. The source of nutrients is a dense increase, but it's not going to stimulate a high amount of insulin, which is one of the biggest predictors of whether or not it will impact that blood pressure. You answer that for an obese patient that comes into my practice who's never been on a ketogenic diet, and we got to get them there. The first 2 weeks there's a lot of chemistry changes that happen during that time. And it will increase their blood pressure because they're adding salt to a high insulin state. Like as I sit here right now, my insulin's not high. Yours isn't high. But when that patient comes in, even if I fasted them for 10 days, their insulin was still high. So they're asking me, can I take that bacon with salt and add it now? I'm like, it'll raise your blood pressure. And to me, that's an end to the means. We're trying to teach you how to eat in a different way in hopes to mobilize fat, to decrease insulin, to get you to stop eating the frequency of meals, the carbohydrates that much. In a patient in the first 2 weeks, it's still going to raise their blood pressure. But do I care? As long as the end where we're headed to is a volume of food is decreased, frequency of food is decreased, and now we are mobilizing something that your insulin has trapped out of control, out of our access for us for over 2 decades.
Okay, so I think to elaborate on that later on, we can talk about the best way to reduce the insulin, which is the right way to correct blood pressure, which is going to help you. And it's not just adding in lots of salt. There's some things that one thing that you should probably do before that. So the next food is red meat, like a ribeye. That's not going to increase my blood pressure. Is it going to increase yours?
Absolutely not. That blood pressure, again, low insulin stimulus and a very nutrient dense food. So I would look and say, you and I are going to be very safe for that.
And most other people as well?
Yeah. I mean, even the guy who's insulin resistant, when they're in that first 10 days, I would not discourage them from doing that. So here's the difference between bacon and steak is the amount of salt per bite. And that curation of the meat has a much higher salt density. And it's not that you won't get to a season where you can handle that better, where your kidneys are not soaked in insulin. But the steak doesn't have as much of it. And it has a higher protein account, has a better volume of food without stimulating or without adding as much salt to it. So you'll see a better response from the steak than you would the bacon.
Interesting. Okay. Next one is seed oils. Is that going to increase blood pressure?
Well, so seed oils, oof. I actually have 2 interviews coming up the next week as I take on the debate for this. I don't eat seed oils. I don't tell patients to eat seed oils. There's a lot of processing that goes with it. And I'm thankful that the country has banned all trans fats from entering our diets. But the evidence on seed oil is, well, it's not as strong as people chirp about. I know, right? There's a debate on that. So when you're looking at the evidence for what seed oils have proven versus what I feel like this is a very similar sense of when celiac disease was something I can diagnose and I could find in patients, but there's gluten sensitivity that I would find in patients that didn't have the test positive. And I don't know if that's the way we would measure that inflammatory response from a seed oil is not at the caliber of what we measure other things for, but the evidence is not. It's not as solid as I wish it was. I don't eat them. I don't want my patients to eat them. I think that accompaniment, when they do look at some of the randomized trials that and the coalition of the data out there on seed oils, it's because they were so heavily involved with all that processed food that you now have the ability to ask questions. So, do I recommend seed oils? No. But when you're looking at the evidence for seed oils, it's not as strong as I want it to be.
So it's not to say that seed oils are healthy. It's to say that Okay, is it going to affect your lower or elevate your blood pressure? No, it's not going to elevate your blood pressure. Is it healthy? Probably not. Is there lots of evidence? We're coming up with more evidence as we are with the carnivore diet. So that's maybe the bigger picture of how it is. Yeah.
Great summary. You've had that question too. You can hear it. I get that question a lot too.
This is quite interesting. Deli meat like salami, is that going to increase blood pressure?
All right. So the first thing I would have folks do is to look at the ingredients in that deli meat. When the ingredients is less than is it meat? Is it processed meat that is still just meat? Like the first time I ate Spam, I was out of the country, and I don't know if it was the same Spam that I would eat here in the country, but it had salt and the processed parts of pork. I mean, it had 2 ingredients in it, and it's really hard to argue that that's going to do anything. Sure, it's not going to spike your insulin. It's 2 ingredients. So I come back to the United States and I start to look at the Spam that was in my grocery store, and there were things like maltodextrin in it. There were other processed parts in it that helped to preserve how long it could be on the shelf. So I think you got to look at the back of the can. Most of the deli meats out there, I feed my kids. I feed them pepperoni. I feed them meats that are high in fat, that are technically processed. But I mean, if you're getting right down to it, if you cut food, it's processed. So where is it that we start to turn this into this negative word? And I think, when I have a patient who's arguing with me about that, like, how can you tell patients to eat Spam and you're trying to control their blood pressure? And I'm like, well, the big picture is we're lowering the insulin. But here, check you. You can go get a glucose meter and check your glucose, eat that food, check your glucose in a half an hour and check your glucose in an hour. How much did it raise? And when you are in the young and healthy version, early in insulin resistance, they don't see that glucose move hardly at all. But by the time they're usually seeing me and their blood pressure is affected by this excess salt, so is the sugar. The sugar shoots way up and it stays up much longer than it should. That is a reflection. You have buckets of insulin around, and the processed meat is still better than the processed carbs. And by processed, what else is in it? Is there maltodextrin? Are there preservatives in it that really do push blood sugars up?
So look at the ingredients on the back of the packet. If a salami or deli meat has multidextrin or stuff that you don't understand, don't eat it. I have a similar question for you. So if somebody has a choice of, say, a hot dog or in a wholemeal bread, so it's together, right? So it's like a hot dog in a wholemeal bread. Which one is going to increase their blood pressure? The hot dog or the wholemeal bread?
Oh, the bread. I also think, do I get at a caveat of long term? If the bread is what they're eating the most of, the processed, the small particles of that bread, gosh, they have the roots and the evidence and everything from animal studies to human studies to longevity studies to say the more volumes of that you eat, the higher it is that you're going to have an insulin resistant problem. We don't have that with processed meat that's clean data. There's some data out there that I think is designed to make meat look bad. And when I look at the patients of saying, just do the experiment on yourself and watch what happens when you eat just the bread and you eat just the meat. Now do that for a week. And the evidence is clear. By the end of the week, they have swelling in their legs. Their blood pressure is way up. By the end of the week with a hot dog, their blood pressure is not up. Their body did acclimate. Their body really did find that the insulin overall lowered in the past week, which was the best improvement for their blood pressure.
Absolutely. So things like deli meats, hot dogs, red meat, bacon maybe down the track, and avoiding the processed carbohydrates and the sugars and multiple ingredients in foods is what you need to do to fix your blood pressure. But I want to talk about now the correct way to fix your blood pressure. And you've mentioned that it's about insulin. But first I want to ask about blood pressure meds, because I think many doctors are going to prescribe, these fancy blood pressure medications, CCBs, calcium channel blockers, beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, ARBs. Are they good to low blood pressure?
The beautiful part of being in today's medicine is it is messy. Those medicines actually do a great job of helping to not allow the aging of the brain, the aging of the back of the eye, and the aging of the kidney. And I'll give a really good shout out to the ACE inhibitors and the angiotensin reuptake inhibitors, the ARBs. Those drugs have prevented more kidney demise than, because without them, I couldn't have lowered their blood pressure. And the evidence of not only lowering the blood pressure, but moving them further away from kidney disease is truly what those medications have done. Now, would I take them if it was me? If I had high blood pressure that I couldn't make go away, well, I'd be sad, but I'd definitely take them. Yeah. I mean, yeah, if I was at a place where I couldn't get my blood pressure to go down. I mean, I've had 3 kids. I have had seasons where I just didn't do a great job of eating correctly. And I've also had this incredible privilege of watching people age. And when the disease in the kidney gets to a certain level and the tipping point isn't reversible, it is a race to the bottom. The quality of life that comes along with the demise of their kidney. I mean, it's something that if you come to see me, I will do something called a basic metabolic panel. And in that basic metabolic panel with a urine test, I calculate what percentage of your kidney is functioning. Glomerular filtration rate. It's a calculation that says, are you at 100% of what we predict? Some of my patients are at above 100%. I'm like, you're good to go. But as you watch them age with high blood pressure, it ticks away at that little bitty number that just sinks lower and lower and lower. When I put you on the medications like angiotensin inhibitors and ARBs, we can start to see that kidney get respite. The pressure is not as heavy, and the kidney can repair. And the kidney it'll have your back until you die, as long as you take away the pressure. So if I would see myself get to a point where I just can't get the blood pressure down, I can't seem to get, the 15 pounds off that need to come off, I'd take the medicine. The kidney function needs to be preserved for me to have a chance of being off of them again in the future.
Is that even if the patient is doing a good diet? Even still then, the blood pressure sometimes cannot be resistant, can be resistant and not come down.
Right. Yeah. There's a great thought experiment going on in the world of providers now, which is, I don't know if you've looked at the market for what's headed our way in the next 5 years. I think one will come out even this year, which is the GLP-1 inhibitors that are at first Ozempic, Wegovy, and now as we move towards the semaglutide that has 2 receptors it touches, we now have one that we think will be hitting 3 receptors. And the list that's coming out is at least a dozen of them over the next 2 years. So the other question would be, could I get their blood pressure to go down if I lowered the weight? If you lowered the weight, even with a hormonal manipulation of these medications, would that reverse their blood pressure? And knowing that this really pulls down on insulin resistance because it just stops them from wanting food, eating food, especially that hedonic food where we just eat it to feel pleasure, which are usually high in carbs and fat and salt. Would that reverse their blood pressure? Those are unknown at this point, but to this point, I look at the studies out there that say they got to a certain point, the blood pressure never went back to normal. They stayed on the medications until the end of time. And I look at the folks in front of me saying, I'm not going to take that prescription. I'm going to do this naturally. And I look at their kidney function from one test to the next, slip down into a soup of a problem that I can't reverse ever, even if I get the weight off. I need a kidney transplant. It's destroyed. So the question I think about over the next few years is, I'm not a big fan of adding $1,000 to your pocket, but we now have new qualifications that if you have sleep apnea, we know that it reverses sleep apnea because they lose the weight. We know that it's got a link to memory problems, and that prevention for dementia is how quickly can we get the weight off once you've put it on. And the reversal is we are reversing insulin resistance because we're decreasing body mass. Could I lower their blood pressure then? And I wish a ketogenic diet would reverse it for all of them, but there's a human involved, and they still make behavior changes, and they screw it up, and so do I. And so I'm not saying that with judgment, but to say, if we know that the blood pressure is a huge predictor, will you have your brain functioning? the day before you die. It means we have to keep the blood pressure controlled as you age. If it's at a tipping point that the only way I can get you there is my prescription, I would use it. I would take it if it was me.
Well, that's fair enough because at least it's an option and it's a safe option, right? Like it's not going to cause any. Okay, so that's good. But I think that people, if they want an alternative to blood pressure meds, they can try dietary protocols or dietary changes. So the ketogenic diet is a wonderful solution to fix your blood pressure. So I want to talk about that. But the thing is, how do you start the ketogenic diet? Because you shouldn't just add bacon. What should you do instead?
Well, you know what? I do let them have bacon. So here's the difference between starting somebody on a ketogenic diet and advising them to take bacon to lower their blood pressure, is that I'm looking at week 2. So I like to warn patients when we do this, if you do it your way, which usually people, I call them my ass over apricot patients. They just tumble into everything. They do everything all at once. They hurry up and do it. And they're eating plates of bacon usually. I said, usually they tumble down that hill and they crash. And then they go back to something that they used to do kind of halfway down the hill. And honestly, that's not helping the chemistry set change as much as we want to. I've had other people say, I'm just going to not eat. I'm going to fast for 3 weeks. And I'm like, you don't have the chemistry to do that. You don't have the hormones built into your body and moving around your body enough to not, I mean, that sounds like a prison statement. And I say that not just because you're not eating food, but because you're not eating food with a metabolism that cannot mobilize things like GLP-1, things that are going to give you pleasure and satiety and make you feel better. And it's not sustainable. I do think the ketogenic diet is sustainable. And that especially is, how do they begin it? So when looking at that, I try to focus on foods that I think people really enjoy. So almost always the first thing I tell them to go eat is buffalo wings with a rub, not a sauce. So it's got plenty of salt on it. It's something I would never tell a high blood pressure patient to go eat if they weren't really looking at the long game. But I say, all right, we're going to start with your first meal is going to have buffalo wings. We're going to start that tonight at supper time. Usually the 2 days before the buffalo wings meal, I have them cleaning out their cupboards. You need to send me a picture, or I'm sending my nurse over to look at your pantry, that we cannot have processed carbs of what you've snacked on for the last 30 years, that close of contact. It's like sending an alcoholic to work at the bar while trying to help him get sober. It's just not conducive to a good outcome. So we start with clean cupboards and buffalo wings. What you can't have is alcohol with it, and you can't have any carbs with it. You can dip it in that fatty sauce, which also has a lot of sodium in it, whether it's ranch or blue cheese. But I want you eating as much of those as you can to feel full. And so this begins a journey to say the goal is to show you how to eat something. Throughout the years, it's been bastardized. Like the goal of eating turned into something that was on your watch, or something that fit into your lunch hour, or something that kept you from being lonely at night. It is not this source of nutrients that was going to be the root of whether or not you're going to see an internist for the rest of your life and take 16 prescriptions by the time you're 70. That option is available, but I must reprogram where you're going. So they start with that meal. I have them wake up the next morning, and I want you eating eggs. And I tell them sausage or bacon isn't a bad idea. So yes, it's on the menu for the first couple of days because I want them full. I want them full. And as we work through those first few days, it's a very heavy carnivore diet. There's lots of sodium in it. But what there isn't is a lot of insulin stimulating, I almost said medications, foods. And you'll see that I want them checking their blood pressure every day. I mean, I've stopped as many as 5 blood pressures in one patient over a 48-hour period because they were coming to me. They weren't checking their blood pressures as often as they should have during that week. So they got to the 4th day, they're on 5 medications, and we're pulling back on all of them, because when you stop putting in those foods that stimulate insulin, well, now the signal for that blood pressure is a whole different mechanism. First of all, in those first 3 or 4 days, when we lowered the carbs, we kept the fat, we kept the protein, and we kept you feeling good. Like, it wasn't just dehydration. Like, I have people say the only reason you lose weight on a ketogenic diet is dehydration. Like, no, it is a chemistry shift that I am planning on. Watching those blood pressures every day really is a part of the success of this. But by about the 4th day, they need almost half as many prescription, whether it's number of prescriptions or half the amount by that 4th day. And usually it's by the end of the 2nd week that I can have them off of almost all of their medications. Whether they get to stay off or not depends on this switch. I can get them off, but whether the kidney can calibrate and keep it that low is something that I usually can't see until we're in that 3rd or 4th week of a ketogenic diet.
Is that how long they stay on the diet? Is that an indicator of how long their insulin is going to be going lower and their blood pressure is going to be lower and they're going to get healthy? It's how long they stay on the ketogenic diet. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So when I use the word ketogenic diet, I'm specifically looking that I could prick your finger and I could measure ketones in circulation. So if you have that blood level from 0 to 0.4, I don't call that a ketogenic diet. Once it's at 0.5, I give you points for being at least on a ketogenic diet. And when I have a patient come in and I think of them as the metabolic train wreck. They have, an excess of 100 pounds often, and they have the list of prescriptions. And we take a left turn and say, okay, we're going to use a ketogenic diet to do this. The amount of insulin they're making every day is astonishing, if you could see it. And when you take away the biggest stimulus of that, which was the carbohydrates, we get an incredible outcome over the first week. When I implement, we're doing essentially no carbohydrates, and it's a very carnivore heavy diet. But they'll get to the end of that 1st or 2nd week, and they'll have ketones that are like 3.2. So high that if we have a support group going on, every other person's there with a hairy eyebrow saying, why aren't my ketones that high? And I'm like, just wait for it. Their body will adjust. Their body will get used to it, just like this with the salt. And in the salt situation, it was a kidney thing. But in this situation, it is a body's production of insulin and the cell's ability to listen at a cellular level for insulin. So essentially, it's the insulin resistance that we're trying to reverse. When I look at a young mother who's got the extra 50 pounds on after the baby, and the baby's healthy, and she's like, how do I get this off? I'm like, do a ketogenic diet for 6 weeks. And it's amazing how quickly that insulin reverses. They feel better. And do they need to stay on a ketogenic diet for the rest of their life? No. Do I encourage a low carb? Probably. That's a different story than the guy who's several prescriptions in with high blood pressure. He's been making high insulin for 25 years. And when I took him through the first 2 weeks of that, he lowered his carbohydrates to under 20 total grams per day. We got his blood pressure down. He's feeling better. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, his fat cells start to open up. His endocrine, the fat-based hormones in his endocrine system start to move those hormones around the body, and he feels so much better. His brain is better. He sleeps better. But then his body adjusts. And if you're checking blood ketones, it's about that 3rd or 4th week that they're now starting to sink down into the 0.8, 1.2 instead of the sky high numbers like they had at the beginning. And of course, what's happening at a cellular level is the body's need to produce insulin is lower. And they're figuring out the rhythm, like how many times do I need to eat in a day? When do I really feel full? So we're dealing with a lot of social issues related to eating. And then they usually screw up. They usually say, I'm going to have a cheat day. I've heard people do this. They have a bunch of carbohydrates. Their blood pressure goes way back up. Their insulin, the cells that make insulin are ready to produce that insulin again if you ask. And they produce a bucket of insulin. And here it comes all back. And many times it can take me, it can take a couple of months before they want to try again to be on a ketogenic diet. Like, oh, it didn't work. Like, it's not that it didn't work. It's that we're fighting this chemical process that you can't see that is very much about the longevity of your life that I can measure in your blood pressure. And I know by putting you on a low carbohydrate diet enough to keep you in nutritional ketosis, that's how I reverse this cellular level. I mean, at a fundamental level, the reason blood pressure hurts us is it's inflammatory. The pressure is too much for our bodies to handle. I started to say that part about the magic school bus, that what we didn't realize until probably a decade ago is that if you were looking inside your blood vessels in a healthy person who's not got high blood pressure, there is this beautiful protection, much like the slime layer that's in our gut. Our arteries have a slime layer. It is called a glycocalyx, and it's gorgeous and beautiful, but I can't see it. Even when a cardiologist puts a stent in your arteries, they can't see it. And as the pressure stays high long enough, it destroys that protection. That glycocalyx becomes thinner and weaker and not as robust at protecting us. And insulin is at the root of that. That inflammatory thing that killed off that glycocalyx was always insulin. And I contend you will see it be your hero when you lower the insulin and start to, coax back that glycocalyx, do other things that are really healthy for you. And what I hope is you don't suffer with blood pressure too high, too long, that we can't resurrect that. The first 3 weeks of a ketogenic diet are not going to do that. You're going to have this wave of improvement. We're going to lower the inflammation. We're going to get a bunch of, we are going to diurese, which is the same word the haters saying, oh, you're just dehydrating the body. No, you are diuresing them for a couple of reasons. And then they equilibrate. And now I need to push you to reset things again. And I think this is that long game that a ketogenic diet, just like it took you 20 years to develop these problems inside your body, I'm going to need some time to undo them. And I'm working with the psychology of your life. Like when you hear that your family of origin celebrated with food and got lonely with food, and those processed carbs are how you still comfort yourself when you're upset. We need to address that. And if we don't, this lifestyle won't stick. So there's a lot more to it than just, do I want them to take blood pressure medicines during that? I don't want their kidneys to die. I don't want them to not be the ass over apricot people. I want them to get into this and know we've got a long game ahead.
Is this something that if somebody has high blood pressure that they can do by themselves, or should they consult with a doctor that understands a ketogenic lifestyle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always said yes to that, but I will tell you, I've had patients who've, come to me at conferences. I guess they're not my patients. I would call them patients. They're chronic high blood pressure people. And, they wrote in 100 times to try and become my patient, and there's just not enough of us, right, trying to do this reversal process. And she said, I read your books, I've watched your YouTube, and I have some online classes that they took. And so I've actually never met them. But one of the most inspiring things that happens in that story is they said, I took this to my doctor, and I showed my doctor what I was able to accomplish by taking carbohydrates out and making sure I was in a nutritional ketosis state. I mean, I continue to tell patients, you do not need to see a doctor to do the ketogenic diet. There are a lot of metabolic issues that are being navigated that I think your doctor should know about. What I have heard the frustration of patients over and over again is sometimes you're going to understand metabolic health better than your doctor does, not because they're not smart or they're not committed, but because they've been in this lane like I've been in. I mean, to get the words to come out of my mouth that the blood pressure should be in the 110s over the 70s, it still catches in my throat. Like, I've been indoctrinated. I've got to, check myself at the door. Am I doing the best thing for this patient in front of me? And there's pride involved in that as well. Like, I want to be good at what I do. I want to have the right answer. And so does your doctor. And so when they go in and ask permission, I often find that they get shot down. Like, here's all the reasons you shouldn't do it. And the stories that are super inspiring are, I read your book. I've, read, Mark Hyman's book, whoever else guided them, and took the story to my doctor. And my doctor is a believer, has started using this to help patients as well. Because I think that's the only way we get ahead of this. That if you look at the number of patients that keep coming to me with high blood pressure, I mean, again, 6 out of 30 are not just on one medicine. They're on usually 2 to 3 medications. And that's only grown worse over the last 20 years.
I want to ask you about exercise because people say in the YouTube comments, you always talk about foods to eat and not to eat and diet, but you don't mention exercise. And exercise just fixes everything. I exercise and it fixes everything. That's what some people say. So, pertaining to blood pressure, does exercise help?
It absolutely helps. When you look at the stretch, relax, arteries are really a muscle. And so when you're asking them to do their job by stretching and relaxing, yes, exercise does help. But so does sitting in a sauna. So does changing that metabolism by pushing your heart rate as a workout. I'm putting that in quotes, that I'm asking your heart to do more than it did yesterday. I'm pushing it as an increase in the heart rate, and at a time where you're surviving because you're off putting heat in that sauna. I mean, I think I know I have a bias that for 20 years I did everything possible to get patients to exercise, to lose weight. And it was awful. I wrote prescriptions. I did community events. I started nonprofit organizations to try and help. How do you do this? How do you actually get a patient to lose weight? And it wasn't until, and the studies show this. I didn't have it in my head until, I got up close and personal in my own life that, oh, yes, you lose weight in the kitchen. What you eat is how patients lose weight. And if I look at the biggest predictor for heart disease being that insulin resistance and the weight that you've put on that you can't seem to take off, we're going to make the biggest difference when we start saying, here's the foods I want you to eat. And here's the foods I don't. Here's the timing. Here's the amount. Here's the things I want you to measure. And you can only get a patient to do so many things on one visit. I want them to have the biggest bang for their buck. When I see a friend, this is a personal story, a friend of mine who's got a terrific problem with her blood pressure, 4 to 5 medications. And indeed, she might have a kidney disease that is genetic, like, oh, it's from my parents. And I still stand with what I said is, you have a lever that you've been pulling for many, many years that says the blood pressure isn't nearly that important. And she says, well, I'm going to start going to the gym. And I said, does the gym have a sauna? Because the woman's 100 pounds overweight. I mean, to get her to work out at a level that her heart would get the benefit that would lower blood pressure, the amount of time she would need to do it, it would destroy her knees. It would destroy her hips. She doesn't have the capability, the physical strength in those tendons in to do that. She's carrying it. She's ruck packing with 100-pounder. That's impossible. Get the weight down, get the brain feeling better, get her sleeping through the night, get the body feeling well, and that exercise comes along. So I get that comment a lot that I don't focus enough on exercise. Yes, it's because the majority of the patients that are listening to my YouTube are desperate for an answer of where to begin, of how to find success. And although exercise is part of that equation, that conversation is a million times easier when I've got their metabolic health at a place that's reversed 15 years from where they are when we first start the conversation. And that's how we get a successful story for that patient.
That's what I think as well. I mean, exercise is great and people walk, but they're not going to go an hour and a half in the gym every day. It's easier to fix what you eat. Last question for you. Signs and symptoms of high blood pressure. What can people look at if they haven't checked it before? What are some symptoms overtly that they could see on their body?
I'm really sorry to tell you that when the symptoms show up, you're in big trouble. I mean, even when you're doing that little experiment where you put extra salt on the bacon and watch your blood pressure go up for the day, you'll notice you don't feel anything. I tell patients, you don't die of high blood pressure when it's there for a day. You die of high blood pressure when it's there for 6 months. So it's this slow, insidious story that, but doc, my blood pressure is 190 over, 120. I'm like, yes. And how long has it been that way? And you have a migraine headache. You're in a terrible amount of pain. And, so, well, maybe the high blood pressure caused the migraine, or maybe the migraine headache is increasing the blood pressure, which is a normal response to pain. And when it's super high like that, sure, I can get you some meds that'll lower it. But I'm doing that to make everybody feel a little better. That's not actually going to be could you have a stroke at that level? Sure. But if you're looking at a 22-year-old in a severe car accident, their blood pressure is super high because of the stress response. That's part of how we're designed. It's when the blood pressure is high for months on end that people die. And the symptoms they have are silent. I mean, 50% of all heart attacks are end up at the morgue. I think that lower is in the 40s now, but that statistic is something I can remember from the first year of medical school. Like, you're going to find the biggest advocate for heart disease, or the most expertise of heart disease, is going to be not the cardiologist, the mortician. It's because the symptoms are silent, and blood pressure is predicting that heart attack, but it doesn't talk to you. And so I would not give them false hope by saying you're going to feel it. You have to look at it. You have to check it. It's one of those, welcome to the 21st century, folks. Check your own blood pressure.
Okay. Was there anything that I didn't ask you that was pertinent to this conversation apart from marijuana?
No. Well, no, I think you did a great job. I feel, I'll tell you that I feel like I whiffed a little, saying if the sprint trial separated out into men and women, it's been a long time since I've read it, and I don't remember that. So I tell my patients the same. What does the sprint trial say? Did you see it?
I know I heard from you, and so I quoted the sprint trial, but I just wanted to say men and women. So it doesn't matter. It's just that it matters that the blood pressure should be less than 120/80. But I mean, if we covered everything, I'm happy. It's good. It's fine.
Okay, good. I'm like, I don't think there was a difference. If there was, it was so little, I stopped separating it long ago. And I'm like, no, here's the rules. Here's why.
I will try to leave the link for everything in the Primal Lab. So we have a section that all the show notes are there. So your book, your website, everything about you, Dr. Boz, is going to be there. And I'll put the sprint trial. So if somebody wants to read it, they can read it. If somebody wants to find you and see you more and hear from you more, where can they find you?
Yeah, the best place that I ask patients for support is to sign up for our newsletter. I've had a couple of videos that have been canceled, and I do worry that I am pushing the edge of saying, here's what I talk about behind an exam room door. And I know the rules. I don't think I broke them, but I still had that. I've had videos canceled. And so I've learned, sign up for the newsletter. There's a lot of fun things we do to help patients across the globe. And it's a business model that I've never done before. So anybody that does support us, I just think medicine needs to change. And I'm trying to be the change. It's a little uncertain where I get to land, but I love what I do. I love what I do. So sign up for our newsletter at bosmd.com. And that's the only thing that doesn't get canceled.
Of course not, because it's your thing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Boz. This has been a wonderful resource for people to lower their blood pressure, but also to get healthy. And I'm sure we're going to see you again very soon.
Yes. Well, thank you. Keep doing great work, because I say praise about your stuff all the time. It's great not only to have a curious person asking the questions, but then just to see the impact that you have for people. Like, it's a great megaphone. Keep using it.
Thank you for joining me today on this episode with Dr. Annette Bosworth. If you'd like to know more information about how to fix your blood pressure with a full guide, plus all the resources from this episode, simply go to the description of this video, click on How to Fix Your Blood Pressure, open that, and you'll see all the information there. That's called the Primal Labs. You'll see all the information there about how to fix your blood pressure. Now, if you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please hit the subscribe button. You can also find me on other social media accounts. I'm on Instagram and on X, formerly known as Twitter, under the name of the Primal Podcast. Now, if you love this episode with Dr. Boz, you'll also enjoy another episode I did with Dr. Boz. We spoke about the correct way to fix insulin resistance. Dr. Boz will talk about how insulin resistance is linked to the world's most chronic diseases, probably something that you have, and the correct way to fix insulin resistance, and why you need to try a butter-only day to fix insulin resistance. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.